Hello, everybody. This is Professor Lieu. I'm here today to do another Q&A on art school portfolios, and I thought I would point you out to some of the new resources that we have on artprof.org. For example, we do have a complete art school portfolios guide, which I'm happy to say we have almost tripled the content that used to be on there. You can go to the main page, but on the main page, you will find that it does direct you to a number of different pages. And I think one of the pages that's going to be the most useful to all of you is this page here, which provides a number of art prompts, places for you to get started. Because I think for a lot of students, once you're actually in the moment, once you know what you're up to and have an idea that you're trying to develop, certainly there are challenges at that point, but things tend to move along a little bit more clearly. I think the hardest part for a lot of students and also artists as well, including myself, it's the getting started part. That's the part that I think everybody really struggles with. In fact, I had a colleague many years ago, and his mantra was just start. And it's great because every single time I find myself stalling for how to get started, I just think in my head about my colleague saying, just start. Get it on paper. Put something down. Doesn't matter how totally crappy or unuseful it is, do something. And you'll find that sometimes that act of just putting a pencil in your hand and just moving that hand across the surface of a sketchbook, that is your version of just start. And I think that a lot of people do spend a lot of time thinking about what they want to do. Well, maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do that. But that's actually, I think, sort of a waste of time. I think it's a lot better if you just have your hand moving and doing something. Ultimately, that will lead you to something else. So again, we do have this main art school portfolios page, which has multiple pages. There's sections on brainstorming, on drawing, on color, on composition. And we've beefed up this section of our site because we've been doing a lot of live streams here on YouTube to fill in the blanks, because there's a lot of content that I just feel like I could write a novel about. And so the videos I'm hoping are going to enhance the content that's already on this page. If you guys are watching, feel free, jump into the chat box, ask me your questions about art school portfolios, because wow, those February deadlines, they're getting closer and closer, and it's already December. It's sort of crazy that we're almost going into the new year. And so now is the time, guys. Ask me your questions. Look at the art prompts, because you know something? A lot of the prompts that we have listed here, a lot of them are tutorials and project ideas that we have on our website, but there's a whole bunch in here that I just direct people to some of the Instagrams of some of our staff. For example, Lauren Welch, she just created these beautiful bird coasters that she actually had laser cut, and they're gorgeous. I mean, Lauren does a lot of wonderful bird work. Like, she does a lot of acrylic painting, she does a lot of marker drawings, but I thought that was such a cool design project. I know a lot of people tend to think about, okay, well, if I want to do graphic design or industrial design, what are some projects I can do? And I talked in the last stream about how everybody does a poster, everybody does the same brochure, but like a coaster, that's so specific. And I've never seen coasters in an art school portfolio. Or I see a lot of people do packaging design, like they'll say, okay, this is an album cover. This is very common. So if you can do something that's outside of those expectations, that can help a lot. What I wanted to talk about in today's stream, which I think is actually probably one of the most difficult parts of creating an art school portfolio, is the brainstorming part. If you go to the art school portfolios page, it's under tutorials. We do have a page here that's about brainstorming and ideas. And what's challenging about this is that you can't predict how it's going to go ever, there's no formula, there's no guarantee that you're going to get a good idea. But there definitely are ways that you can be a lot more proactive, things you can do that are actionable that will get you closer to a better idea. Last stream, I talked about different materials, different format and subject matter that all of you could address in your portfolio that will make you stand out. Things that I don't tend to see. For example, making paintings that are not a rectangle, creating artwork that's about current events or that has political themes, those types of things. And what I want to talk about today is when you have those ideas, okay, how do you actually start to develop them? Because the biggest issue that I see in terms of brainstorming is that people either don't do it at all and they just jump into the final piece without doing any sketching or any thought or research in advance, or they come up with an idea and they go with their first idea. They don't take the time to actually enhance it and do variations and revise it many times. The way that I would think about it, I'm sure those of you who are applying to art school portfolio that you've probably taken an English class in high school, you've probably had to write essays and research papers and things like that. And your artwork is actually not that dissimilar. For example, would any of you here get assigned an essay, write it in one sitting all at once, and then turn it in? Probably not. At least in the olden days, I would always write a rough draft. Maybe I would show it to the teacher. They'd give it back to me with comments. I'd do another draft. And so an essay is not something you just write once and then step away from. You usually are going over it multiple times. You're usually working on it over a period of several days. Like, you're not usually finishing it and starting it within the same day. If you think about your artwork the same way, it totally makes a lot more sense. One of the things you can do to get started, if you have an idea, identify the cliche. If you don't know what a cliche is, it's basically the most obvious generic version of whatever it is you're trying to create. For example, if you had an assignment and somebody wanted you to do an image that had to do with time, how many people do you think would make an image of a watch or an hourglass or a clock? That is the cliche. And in fact, sometimes I use Google image search to figure out what that cliche is. Like, if you guys go online right now, you do a Google image search for the word time, I bet you anything, every single image for a while is going to be clocks and hourglasses and watches. That is the cliche. And so if you think about what is that cliche for the theme you're working with, that can be really helpful. For example, I've had a lot of students, they'll do pieces about social isolation, or they'll maybe talk about emotional angst, or I've had a lot of students do projects about anxiety or depression. And if you guys do a Google search, image search for depression, it's pretty much all photos of people doing this. And they're usually sitting in a corner. That is the cliche image if somebody wants to create an artwork that's about depression. And so identifying the cliche is really important, because most people, if they don't go through that process, they're just going to go with the cliche. I mean, that's why everybody ends up creating really similar artwork. Those of you who are watching, I'd love to have you jump into the chat box. Tell me what you're thinking. Tell me your questions. What do you want to know about what will help you prepare an art school portfolio? And I'm going to keep talking about brainstorming. And so the whole point of identifying the cliche is so that you can eliminate it. You can get it out of your system and you can move on. You can say, you know what, if I don't draw a clock or an hourglass or a watch to represent time, what's another way I can do that? And that's when the real work begins, when you actually have to engage beyond just skimming the surface, because that's what the majority of students do. Most students will not do thumbnail sketches. Most students will not take the time to research a theme, to think about, for example, if you're doing an image about some current event, don't just go online, find a photograph that a photojournalist took of that event and copy it. Like, that's not really engaging with the theme. And I see that a lot, where people just say, oh, I want to do this current event. Let's say you want to do something about the protests that are happening in Hong Kong. A lot of students will say, oh, here's a photo from Hong Kong. I'm going to do a drawing of it. And the thing is, you have to think to yourself as an artist that you have to engage beyond just reproducing the photo of the event. How can you really talk about that? For example, one of my classes that I'm working with this semester, it's actually a group of high school students that I teach on the weekends. We are actually, we just finished this project. This is a project on linoleum block printmaking. And I had all the students research articles in the newspaper. So they all had to deal with some type of current event. And it was great because some of the topics were very political. Some of them were about things like school lunch, so education. Some of them were about race. And so, like, really, really, I think, engaging, challenging images and subjects. But that's exactly why those subjects are exciting, because it's not the same thing as doing something like, oh, I painted a still life with some tomatoes and a vase. And those are good for technical exercises. But I think what a lot of art schools say very often, because I have had a lot of students go to National Portfolio Day and they come back and I say, okay, well, what feedback did you guys get from the admissions officers? And a lot of them say things to me like, well, they really want me to show my voice more. They want me to be more creative with my ideas, and that what I'm doing right now looks a little bit too generic. You want to try to create artwork that only you can make. Like if it looks like everybody else's project, you got to do something different. And even still life doesn't have to be like that. I mean, there's a lot of wonderful still life painters who do really unusual things with that genre. I just think it doesn't get a lot of exposure, for example. And so you can make anything personal. It's just that's a direct initiative that you have to be intentional about. Let's see, we have a comment from Rafal Wilowski. Really liked the tutorial. It was very helpful in explaining how to turn photographic references into original artwork. Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that that was helpful. And actually, I think next week, Kat Huang, who is a teaching artist at Art Prof, she is going to be doing a art talk live stream about how to use photo references. Because I think when a lot of people hear photo reference, I think the assumption is, okay, you take the photo and then you copy it. You use the exact same composition. But you don't want to think about it that way. You want to think about a photo reference as like a raw material. So, for example, if you were baking a cake, the raw material would be the flour, the eggs, the sugar. You have to think about your photo references that way, that you're not just going to like take the sugar and just serve people a bowl of sugar. Like that's not going to be a very good cake. But you're going to take that sugar and you're going to transform it. You're going to mix it and blend it with all types of other things and change it from there. So that's the important thing about photo references, is that they are highly manipulated and that they are transformed into something that really is yours. Because so often I just see blatant copies of photos and it's like, that's so mechanical. Like there's nothing that creative about that. And also, especially, I think if it's not your photo, that's even worse, because then you're just copying someone else's photo. Let's see. Jacob Gong saying, I enjoyed the Chipboard Sculpture project. Would something like that be usable in an art school portfolio? Absolutely, for sure. I mean, what I like about that project is that it's pretty abstract. And so I think a lot of people in high school get very fixated on images being totally recognizable. Like, oh, if I'm going to paint something, people have to know I'm painting an orange, or that has to be recognizable as a teapot, or it has to look like a face of a person. But the thing about this project that I think is really fun is that there is nothing recognizable about it. And you're really just thinking about shapes. For those of you who have never seen this tutorial, it's an abstract sculpture project, but it's actually based on different sides of your personality. And so Annalise Yee, who is in this in this tutorial with me, she actually talks to me about the different facets of my personality and then how do you represent that in terms of abstract shapes. And I think a lot of high school students don't have a lot of experience in that area. I think that really learning just to think about shapes and their engagement is really wonderful to see. Another example of one that actually I think is a little bit more intuitive than the chipboard project would be this balsa wood carving project. And I was surprised by this project because I'm such a planner. I love planning things and knowing down the line what I'm aiming to do. But this project, I actually don't recommend that people do that because a lot of this project is really reacting to the material. Like, what does the balsa wood want me to do with it? And that's so different than I think a lot of other materials where you really can change things a lot. Because the thing about the balsa wood is that every piece of balsa wood you get has a different personality. And that's what's fun about it. Like some pieces of balsa wood are a little bit harder, or one has a little soft section, but this section is a little bit stiffer. And what's fun about that is really developing a relationship with your supplies in a spontaneous way that is not so pre-planned. And so this sculpture you're looking at in this slide, I did not plan that shape. I just ended up making that shape based on the way it was reacting. And so that's sort of fun to work more spontaneously. Let's see, Aiden James is saying, I'm applying to transfer to art school for illustration and painting. However, I also do a lot of work involving graphic design and photo. Should I also include these projects in my portfolio? Absolutely, for sure. I would say for graphic design, really make sure it's good graphic design, because I have to say that I see a lot of really excellent painting and drawing in portfolios because I do think it's a little bit more accessible in terms of art education and what people have available to them at school. But the thing is, a lot of graphic design work I see is just really bad. It's a lot of it is like people making an image and then slapping on some text last minute. I don't see a lot of people really engaging with the topography, with the interaction of the image and the text. And again, what I see all the time is I made a poster. It's like instead of doing that, do something that is more unusual. Like tell yourself that you're going to make a version of the New Yorker cover, or I mentioned in the last stream, make a Google Doodle, your own version of that. Something that's more unusual that not everybody does, because what everybody usually does for graphic design, it's usually posters and album covers. I see that a million times. Pick a graphic design situation that is not that, and then play with it. Have a lot of fun. Jacob is saying, I've been struggling and trying to showcase my personality through my work. What I have been mainly trying to do is creating scary/dark pieces that express my emotions. Okay, so one thing that I would really recommend, Jacob, take a look at some artists who work with that genre, because I think what I see a lot when people are creating pieces that are on the scarier dark side that are supposed to be very emotional is people, again, tend to fall into that cliche, which is a screaming face. Now, don't get me wrong. Trust me, I have done my share of screaming faces. If you guys go to my website, you will see a lot of screaming faces, okay? But I think the thing is, you have to put that screaming face in a context. Like, actually, there's a wonderful painting. I'm going to actually look it up right now for you guys. It's by David Alfaro Sequeiros, and it's a beautiful painting. I'm just going to type it in so I can find the name of it. And let's see. So I'm going to type this in the chat box so you guys have it. So it's David Alfaro Sequeiros. And the painting is called Echo of a Scream. It's a really startling image, and it really is one of the best portrayals I've ever seen of a screaming face. It's basically a scene where there's this like ravaged space. I mean, it looks like the aftermath of a war or something like that. And then you have this very young abandoned child who has this gargantuan head that just takes over the entire space. And it hurts to look at this painting. This painting just, it's painful in a really poignant way, not in a way that is really silly. So I think that can happen a lot is how many screaming faces have we seen? But it's like, how can you make that screaming face more specific so it's not just totally arbitrary? Karen is saying, can you give some tips for photographing your artwork if you don't have a budget to get an extra camera? Yeah, actually, Karen, what I'm working on right now is a whole section for the art school portfolios page that is about how to photograph your artwork, because there are ways to do that. And honestly, if you guys have like an iPhone 10 or higher, that is totally fine for web. I think it's best, obviously, if you have the budget, to get a DSLR camera. Canon Rebel is the series that I recommend, but I know for some people that's not possible because they're not cheap. But an iPhone 10 or higher is absolutely totally doable. But I think, Karen, if you don't have the budget for lights, which can get pricey, what I recommend is shooting your photos outdoors on a cloudy day where you don't have that like super ultra bright, intense light. Because when the lighting is like that, oftentimes your image gets blown out. I mean, if you have a DSLR, you can like adjust everything to make sure it works. But on a cloudy, diffused day, that can really work for you. I mean, I think in general, if you don't have money for lights, you're always best off shooting outdoors, because the biggest issue I see in terms of color correction, people try to shoot their artwork indoors, and if you don't have specialty lights that are created for that, you end up with very yellow photos. Like, that's usually the issue. I rarely see photos that are too blue. Once in a while I do, because sometimes people don't have the correct color balance set. But if you shoot outdoors, the color tends to be way more accurate. And I will say that it is much better to focus on getting a good photo than to tell yourself, oh, I don't need to bother, I'll just Photoshop it later. Because no amount of Photoshop is going to fix a bad photo. It's much better to take a good quality photo. Karen is saying there are daylight bulbs in hardware stores. Does that work? If you're not using a DSLR camera where you can really go in and fix everything, usually not, because what you actually really want are tungsten bulbs. You know something? I have some of them. They're right here on my counter. Hang on one sec. Here we go. Okay, so this is the ones that I use. These are called photo flood lights, and these are very, very high wattage. So if I take them out, they're really gigantic. They're like this, and they're 500 watts, and they're very cool. So if you shoot these, you will not end up with super yellow photographs unless you have the white balance like totally set wrong. So this is my recommendation. And I will tell you guys, if you are somebody who does need to photograph your work regularly, you can get a pretty good lighting kit from B&H Photo for like $120. And that's like 2 stand lights with the bulbs and also the lighting umbrellas. And those are super helpful. Once you buy that lighting kit, you have it forever. Like, you're never going to have to buy it again. And the bulbs, I don't use them very often, so they last a pretty long time. But again, it's okay if you can only shoot outdoors. Usually whenever I shoot oil paintings, I don't tend to shoot oil paintings indoors because the glare is just horrible. Most of the time you're going to get really, really bad glare. And I have done it indoors, but it's tricky. It's really hard. But I always use my DSLR for that. But if you're just posting stuff on Instagram or on your website, you totally are okay with an iPhone 10. That was not the case many years ago. Like, I was always telling people you have to get a DSLR. But today you don't have to do that so much. By the way, those of you who are joining the stream, tell me where you're from. I'm always so curious to know where people are watching from. I mean, I think it's amazing what an international audience we have. So it's great. I feel like I've learned a lot from all of you. So just jump in the chat box. Tell me what city, what country. Tell me how you found us. I'm always curious about that as well. It does seem like a lot of people find us on YouTube, but sometimes people find us in other places as well. So getting back to what we were talking about with brainstorming, I think the key thing is that you spend time with the idea and you don't get impatient, because a lot of students will do 2 sketches and say, oh, I know, I definitely want to do this one. And I'm like, how do you know? You only have 2. Like, don't you want a few more options? I always make my students do at least 6. I think for a lot of people, 10 or 12 is a little bit better. But spend time with these ideas and really mull over it, because oftentimes it's like the 20th iteration before I find something that's better. And I actually had a student 2 weeks ago who really did not want to do more than one sketch. He was really, really convinced that he had the right idea. This is the only one I want to do. And I sort of kicked his ass a little and I said, you're going to do more. And we're going to see how he did not want to do it. But then actually said to me later, he was like, you know what, that was actually worth it because I like what I have now much better than what I had an hour ago. And honestly, brainstorming doesn't take that long. It's more just giving yourself the headspace for that. I think a lot of people are very eager to get to the final artwork, which I get, but spend some time on that. Let's see, we've got Germany, California, Scotland. Wow, Scotland, that is so cool. I don't know that we've ever had somebody on the stream that was from Scotland before. We've had a couple people from Germany. That's really cool. Let's see, Lizzie Annie saying, you found us through recommendations on YouTube about how to make good portfolios. I guess it's our art portfolio videos that people find us. I guess because we're sort of the niche. There aren't a lot of people that have, I think, videos on that. I see like there's a lot of my accepted art school portfolio videos, which honestly, I know why people make those, but I feel like most of the time people tell me how upsetting watching those videos are because it can be very discouraging, especially if you feel like you're not as experienced and you're seeing all these people. And people are so specific about who accepted. They're like, oh, this art school I got into and this art school I didn't. And I don't know if any of you have watched those videos before, but I almost wish that people wouldn't do that because it doesn't make people feel better. I feel like at the very least, the critiques are giving you something concrete that you can actually work with. But I worry about those accepted portfolio videos because it makes people think that they should make work like that. But you shouldn't. You should make work that you want to make. Don't try to make work like somebody else. You're only going to be frustrated if you end up doing that. Let's see. Zada Kamar is listening at work. Oh, cool. New York. Jacob is saying a deadline is on 12/13. You have suggestions on any additional artwork I can create in this short amount of time. My portfolio is mostly finished, but I just want to add a bit more. Let me see. I think, Jacob, it's hard for me to give you something really specific because I don't have your portfolio in front of me. But Jacob, I don't know if you have any gesture drawings in your portfolio, but actually I was showing people, we have this new cat drawing tutorial, which we just released about a week or so ago. And if you don't have gesture drawings, I would definitely put those in. And actually, it's fun to do gesture drawings of animals because I feel like a lot of people are like, oh, it has to be a live nude model in a life drawing class. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. I don't usually see gesture drawings of animals. And I know some people don't have access to that. But I mean, if you have a friend that has a cat, like that's all you need. Or even if you have, I mean, I have guinea pigs. I draw my guinea pigs all the time. And so that could be something fun. That might make you stand out as opposed to just drawing people. Oh, Zadok found us from Urban Sketchers related videos. I liked your video on travel sketching in Taiwan. Oh, very cool. I'm so glad that you like that. Yeah, we really want to do more travel tutorials. It's just, oh my gosh, they're expensive because of the plane fare and getting out there. And I just happened to have this trip with my family planned. And I actually was not planning to shoot this tutorial. And my business partner, I was chatting with them before I went to Taiwan, and they're like, why don't you just bring a camera? I was like, what? Are you crazy? I'm like, I'm going to a foreign country with my whole family. When am I going to have time to do that? He's like, just bring it. Just see what happens. And then I got there and I was like, oh my God, this is the most fun I've had in so long. And now I'm like totally addicted to it. I don't know if any of you have seen, we also have another travel tutorial where actually the four of us, me, Casey Roonan, Eloise Sherrod, and Lauren Welch, we all went to Guangzhou, China. This is really fun. So check out this travel tutorial. And I have another one coming because I spent all of August traveling in Utah. So that one's coming pretty soon. Karen is saying, my cat is either sleeping or zooming around the house instead of playing in one place and has proven to be a challenge. Wow, I guess your cat is really active because When I was drawing Tor and Spicy, Tor was moving around a lot. He was actually sitting on my colored pencils for a little while, but Spicy was great. Spicy was just taking a nap. It was awesome. But it's a good challenge, like we were saying. It's good to really see what you can do with that. Let's see. Sierra Smith is saying the portfolio videos make me feel sad that I don't have as many resources as them, like AP art classes and live models. Yeah, see, that annoys me too because it's like, yes, it's great if you have those resources, and some people go to very top notch private preparatory schools where the art departments are like bigger than a lot of colleges and they have incredible resources. I mean, like, I never had a life drawing class in high school. I went to a public school. We never had anything like that. But I did teach at a private school when I got out of my master's degree, and they had everything. They had like ceramics and jewelry and printmaking. And I just was thinking, oh my God, if I had had something like this, wow, my life would have been different. But you know something, Sierra? You don't need those fancy things to do something fun and unusual. Draw your cats. Draw your friends when they're playing video games. Draw your friends when they're on their phones. There's a lot of things you can do. And actually, if you guys watch our Guangzhou video, I believe that there's a couple sections where, oh, you know what it is? There's one scene. You should watch this tutorial. It's very funny. We found this giant group of older women. They were in a park. There were probably like 25 of them. And they were like dancing to Mando Pop. It was awesome. And we all drew them. It was super fun. So whatever you can find, do that. You don't need a life model in order to do all these things. So yeah, just you got, I'm hoping Art Prof gives you guys those resources. I hope that we can level the playing field a little bit because it really isn't fair that it's just about, okay, these people have way more resources and these people have none. It shouldn't be that way. And that's what I'm hoping Art Prof can help fill in the blanks for some of you. Selena is saying, how should you ration out passion / conceptual drawings with the technical things, still life figure drawings, etc.? I mean, I would say, Selena, if you're not absolutely thrilled and passionate about a piece in your portfolio, it's going to show. So if you have a still life drawing in there and you were bored the whole time you were making it, don't put it in. Make a still life that you actually care about, one that you are thrilled and excited to do, because it shows. I mean, I can tell when my students are bored. It's really, it's not something you can really hide. And I'll give you an example. This is an oil painting tutorial we have on artprof.org. And in this tutorial, I get to paint a lobster. This is the coolest thing. I've always wanted to paint a lobster. Never got to. And I was so excited to do that. And I think you can tell in the painting that that was fun for me. So a still life does not have to be boring. Figure drawings do not have to be done from a nude model in class. You can mix it up way more than that. Rafal is saying, I don't mind accepted portfolios because I'm not planning on studying art. I can just appreciate their talent. Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on who you are. I mean, for some people, they're just watching the videos because they want to see the artwork, and that's great. I just think sometimes they have unintended consequences on a lot of people. And more often than not, I see a lot of people just feeling terrible about it. Because especially if you have your sights set on a particular school and it's like your number one choice, it's so stressful because you're like watching these people who have already done it. You're seeing how good their work is. And it's very hard. And some of this stuff doesn't get easier. Like, I actually had one student many years ago who was wonderful. And oh my gosh, such a diligent worker. And oh my gosh, wonderful student. And they applied, I think, to 7 art schools. And their number one school, their top choice, it was the only school they didn't get into. And I just think it was crushing to them. It was awful. But you know something? That same student, they ended up at one of the other art schools, and I've kept in touch with them, and they love it there because the school they go to is in New York City. They're having a lot of fun being in the city, getting all those resources. So in the end, it worked out great for them. But at the time, it was very stressful and hard for them to do. Mandy Liu is saying, I'm applying for architecture, but my portfolio has more drawings and paintings, more artist than architecture focused. Does this put me in a disadvantage? I don't know what universities you're applying to, Mandy, because There are some architecture programs that are not at art schools. Like, for example, I think Carnegie Mellon has a pretty good architecture program and a bunch of other places. I do think it might be good for you to think about maybe doing some 3D pieces that can show how you might make that work. For example, we do have on artprof.org, this would be actually a really good project for you to do. I don't have a slide for it. So, what I'm going to do is just post the link in the chat box. So, this is a staircase sculpture project. And there is not a video tutorial for that project, but there are tons of student examples. I do demonstrate in lots of stills how to go about doing that. So I think that might be a good project for you to do. I think anything that's 3D, like we were talking earlier about the Chipboard Sculpture project, I think anything that shows your spatial thinking would be a really good thing to do. Because yes, it's good for you to have drawings and paintings, but I think even something like, I don't know if any of you have ever done this before, but I just love artist books. I feel like artist books are beautiful, and you really have to have good craftsmanship to make a good artist book. Like a artist book that has like so craftsmanship looks bad. Like there are definitely some techniques where if your technical skill is like, it's all right. It's not gonna kill the piece. Like bad craftsmanship will just like destroy your artist book. But I would definitely look at some of the 3D projects, Mandy, because I do think it would be good to expand into that area. I don't think that I can give you a super accurate response because I'm not seeing your portfolio, but that would be my general recommendation. Let's see, Nell Stram is saying, I also like to watch videos about the rejected ones. They are often even more interesting than the accepted ones. Oh, really, Nell? I didn't know that there were videos about people being rejected. I feel like those would be super helpful. If anything, just to commiserate and be like, wow, I'm not the only person out there who is not feeling fabulous about everything. Because I was talking to Jordan McCracken Foster. He's one of the teaching artists at Art Prof, and we were saying that one of the things that really frustrates us as older, more experienced artists is the way that social media really does a disservice for a lot of young artists, because a lot of artists, they don't post their bad stuff online. They're just posting their best work. And I think what happens is a lot of younger artists, they're under the impression that, oh, they just pop out great work all the time. And none of us do. So many of us make bad work all the time. I tell my students, look, if you guys want to make good drawings, you have to make bad ones. That's a requirement. You got to fulfill your quota of bad drawings if you want to be an artist. And I think social media does not help people there. And it frustrates me because I think people need to know more about that. Because I think in some ways, when we release the cat drawing tutorial, I have a couple drawings in there that honestly look like nothing, like scribbles. And it's like, I'm a pretty well established artist. I have a lot of experience. And even then, part of me was thinking as I released that tutorial, oh God, people are going to think I can't draw. These are really bad drawings. But I wanted to show them in the tutorial so people could see, you know what? You're not going to make great drawings all the time. In fact, most of the time you won't. And that's part of it. People need to know that. Okay. Let's see. Mandy Lou is saying, I have 3D pieces, but they are kind of more fine art. Yeah, the staircase sculpture project will be better, Mandy, because it is pretty architectural, because you're using a very rigid material. And it can be very architectural, but there's also a lot of room for creativity and to mess around. Because what I say to my students when I've done that staircase sculpture project is I say, listen, it does not have to be functional. Like, you don't have to pretend that, oh, tomorrow an engineer is going to come by and build this. That's not the case. You can make something that's more fantastical, but you do have to think structurally because it is a staircase, and that is a good format to work with structure. We have a question from Scotty Eiford. I'm a self-taught artist who has never taken any formal art classes. What are some things people like me miss out on when self-educating versus a formal education? I think probably the main thing is the community aspect of it, just being surrounded by so many artists. I mean, I was very lucky I got to go to art school, And before I went to art school, I really had never met a real practicing professional artist. Like to me, an artist was somebody in an art history book who lived in the 14th century. It was like, oh, Michelangelo, he's an artist. But like this idea of like a living, breathing artist today, when I was like, I'd never really met somebody like that. Like I had art teachers, but I actually remember I asked one of my high school art teachers about their own artwork. I said, oh, what does your artwork look like? And what are you doing? And it was sort of a bummer because she said to me, oh, I don't have time for that. And I was like, really? Like, none at all? She's like, I'm too busy teaching. Which, trust me, I sympathize because teaching is very time consuming, especially if you teach at a public school, at high school. It's very hard to do. But I never really had that interaction. So when I went to art school and I met all these like practicing artists, that was like, oh my gosh, it like made it real for me. And I feel like if I hadn't gone to art school, I probably wouldn't have had access to that many people of that caliber. I'm sure if you're self taught, there's other ways to meet artists. I'm sure there's like meetups. I know that Urban Sketchers has a lot of events, and you can always do something like an open studios event or go to like a live. There's options out there. It's just that the difference is that at art school, you're seeing those people all the time. Whereas if you do meetups, it's like you're probably not doing that every single day, but it's like you forge these close relationships with your teachers and students just because you're like logging the hours, like you're stuck in a studio for like 10 hours, like many, many days. And it's like you just really get to know each other well. So I guess it's that community and those relationships that you foster. Kate Solar is asking, do you have any advice getting away from very smooth rendering all the time, perfecting everything and trying messier / looser styles? Okay, my suggestion, Kate, would be for you to draw with something that's number one, really blunt, that's not sharpenable. Like, let me see. I don't know if I have anything. Nah, I don't have anything on my desk right now. But if you, for example, make yourself draw with a big hunk of charcoal that you can't sharpen like a pencil, you're going to have no choice but to not draw details. And then you know what else will really drive you crazy is draw with something that you can't erase. Because what I find a lot of the time is students spend so much more time erasing because they're so frustrated with their drawing that they actually don't end up with anything. Like, have any of you guys here, tell me in the chat box, have you ever been so frustrated and self-conscious about your drawing that you actually erased so much that you ended up with nothing? I've totally done that so many times. And the way I got over it was to draw with something you couldn't erase. So actually this colored pencil tutorial, colored pencil, you can sort of erase it, but it's not nearly as easy to erase as say just a regular pencil. Or actually also, I think using markers is also a really good thing. Or actually, let me see if we have this, let me see if we have the pen and ink tutorial. Oh wait, hang on a second. Let me see. Oh, here we go. So actually, this is a creature design tutorial that we have. And Julie Ben Bassett, who does this tutorial, she works with ballpoint pen. And she does sketch it out with colored pencil first. But it's like once you have that ballpoint pen, you can't go back and erase it. And so I think that's part of it. And also, Kate, I would do lots of gesture drawings. Because I think sometimes there is such a thing as spending too long on a drawing where you just get so precious about it. And it's like the more hours you log, the more precious you get. The nice thing I think about gesture drawing or just short-term drawings, like this drawing I did here of these dumplings, I didn't have a lot of time to do it because we were like sitting down and eating. And so I just had these brush pens and I just did them real fast. And that was it. And the nice thing about markers is that you can't erase markers. Like you have to live with it. And actually, Lauren Welch has a wonderful marker drawing tutorial. Let me see if I can pull up the slide. Oh no, that's a creature design tutorial. Here we go. So if you draw with like one of those big, large, wide markers, you cannot do details and you have to be messy and you have to be bold. So I think, Kate, the key is in the material and not giving yourself lots of time. If you have to, set a timer. Just say, you know what, I got 10 minutes. That's it. That's all I'm going to do. give yourself a structure and stick to it. That's the only way. If you just give yourself forever amount of time, it's too easy to just go back to your own habits. Karen is saying, I had a teacher that told us to always include hands and feet in our figure drawings, but I always feel the compositions become uninteresting when I include everything. What are your thoughts? I mean, Karen, I think it depends on what you're trying to do. For example, whenever I teach an introductory figure drawing class, I always make the students draw every body part. I say, don't clip off the feet, the hands, or anything like that. The reason I say to students to do that when they're learning figure drawing is because that is the only way you can learn proportions. If you draw figures that are always missing feet, always missing the hands, you will never figure out what that relationship is, because there's a million things online where people have all these measurements and, oh, use a compass. I'm not into that. I'm really into just observing, seeing relationships and saying, okay, how long is the leg compared to the hand? How wide is the face compared to the shoulder? I look at size relationships. And if you're missing body parts, you can't do that. Here's an example. When I was in art school, I never drew the heads on my figures. I drew headless figures for 2 years. And I got so used to it that my senior year, I had a teacher who said, Clara, you can't do that anymore. You have to draw the heads on every figure drawing. I could not do it. It was really hard for me. And I was so mad at myself that I did that for so long. It became this really rotten habit. And it took me a whole semester to get out of it. And so now I say to students, I catch them early, I say, you guys have to fix this, because later on, if you're doing a painting or a drawing and it's not meant for just practice and exercise, you can do whatever you want. But I think if you're somebody who's really learning how to study the figure, how to get better at gesture drawing, that's a very important part of that. Sierra saying, yes, one of my sketchbooks right now hasn't had anything drawn on it in like a week because I keep erasing. Yeah, that's why markers are super fun. I mean, something where you just don't have the option. And sometimes you'll surprise yourself. You'll do things that you think look bad for a little while and they get better. Like I remember I had a drawing many years ago. I was so mad, like mad, that it was not going well. And then I worked on it longer and I was like, you know what, it's better. I was like, you know, I could have given up an hour ago, but I didn't. I just kept going. And so a lot of this is in your mind. This is not necessarily that you're a bad artist or you can't draw, nothing like that. It's all about how you think about it, for sure. Let's see, pens, but I know I got some friction pens. So you played with the pens. Okay. Robert Diaz is saying, I've heard you say that when making a 3D piece, a wearable piece is always preferable. Is where it's worn relevant? Example, bracelet seen as better than a headpiece. I wouldn't say that a wearable piece is preferable. I just think that it's more unusual. I think that it's more common for people to, for example, make a book. This is a COPTIC bookbinding tutorial we have online. But the wearable sculpture project that we have is this copper cuff project, which technically demonstrates a technique called copper tooling. And we do demonstrate how to do a patination as well. That's what creates this really beautiful surface. But I think, Robert, where the piece is worn is hugely important, because depending on where you wear the object, it really dramatically influences the shape. Some areas of the body are much harder to fit things on. Some areas are really easy, like a necklace is pretty easy. I mean, you just stick it on. But I know I had some students who wanted to create pieces that like went around the shoulder, and actually the ones that were really hard were the ones that like wrapped around the face, because you have to like figure out how to make it attached to the ear. And I had one student who had something, it was almost like half of an eyeglass. It was really, really cool. But yes, it's not that it's preferable. It's just less common. That's really all it is. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for asking me all your questions. This is so great. I love the conversations we have. I feel like it's so stimulating, and I love hearing all the different opinions. And what I want to do right now is to thank our top supporters who support us on Patreon. And I just have to tell you guys that you are what keeps Art Prof alive, our top supporters on Patreon. And so on Patreon, you can make a monthly donation. It can be as little as $1 a month. It can be more than that, or you can do a one-time donation as well on PayPal. You will find all those links, and you can become a top supporter as well. It's one of the rewards on our Patreon. Go to our Patreon. I hope you guys will support us because I want to keep doing this and I want to keep making content and I want to help level the playing field so that people who don't have access to AP art classes and life drawing classes, that you guys get the support that you need to become an artist, because people should have access to that. That's why I started Art Prof. That's why I have always said to people, no paywall. Our site, artprof.org, is free. Everything is accessible. I can't tell you how many people say to me, just set up a paywall, that will fix all your budget problems. I'm like, yeah, it would, but it would not be true to what I envision Art Prof to be. It would totally become something else. Problem is, you need a budget to stay alive. And so I want to keep it free, but it really helps us, you guys, when you can support us on Patreon, like our top supporters. And if you contribute to Patreon, you get automatically entered into a Patreon monthly giveaway. We're going to be giving away something probably in the next week or so. And on the giveaway, you can get an Instagram critique, a website critique, a portfolio critique. All of these things, usually we charge about $200. You can get mystery artwork. You can get stuff from Deep D, from me. You can get mystery art supplies. You can contribute as little as $1 a month, and you will still be able to get one of these things. And we don't have a ton of people supporting us just yet. So actually the likeliness that you guys could get one of those prizes is pretty high. So I hope all of you will consider that. And thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.